What's up, everybody, and welcome to the Passionate DJ Podcast. I'm your host, David Michael. I have a special guest on the show, Alex Pyatetsky, who is the owner and curator for the DJHookup.com. Alex, thank you so much for being here on the show, and how close did I get to saying your name correctly?
Pretty close. There's an extra vowel somewhere in there, but it's more respectable than most attempts.
I did my best. I realized it was the first time I ever had to say it out loud right now. So thanks.
I'm used to P ...
So thanks for coming on. I wanted to bring you on to talk, a little bit about your background. I'm sure you have a lot to share just from your knowledge from having this online retail business. For those who don't know, the DJ Hookup is the internet's highest rated retailer for DJ hardware. So you've built a great business, and this episode is not sponsored by you, so I just wanted to be, transparent about that. But I did want to go ahead and talk a little bit about that and see how that came about, and also just learn a little bit about you and your history as a DJ and in this whole music thing.
When I was 15, I started going on these. I wanted to make my own music, actually, originally, and I didn't really know what DJing was. I certainly didn't know the difference between DJing and production. The year would be around 2001, so definitely there's no blogs at this point. There's no YouTube, but there are forums, and through forums, to take one step back, up until about that age, the only type of music that I acknowledged as music was heavy metal.
Okay.
As I could neither thrash nor play a double bass or whatever, whatever skills are necessary. I grew up playing piano. That's not a real heavy metal instrument. When I started trying to make my own music back in the day, of course, I ended up making some electronic stuff. And through that, for the first time, I started listening to some electronic music, got into some UK ravey kind of stuff, and which, everyone goes through a period like that. And so I ended up getting on the forums. Through that, I kind of learned the difference between DJing and production, and I kind of realized that, okay, so DJing is more of a real thing for me at this point than producing music. My first job ever, I was a roadie for a mobile DJ company setting up bar bat mitzvahs.
Okay.
I never got invited to too many bar bat mitzvahs when I was actually 12, 13, but I go to a lot when I was 16. I caught up so many times over. But yeah, I got to see that there was a real business in it. And I started DJing. I think I was about 15, 16, went straight for the techniques route back then. Fell in love with scratching, got into hip hop through the back door, weirdly, through DJ Shadow and Portishead and stuff like that. And really was the scratching. And then through those guys, I found out about DJ Newmark and Cut Chemist. So then I found J5, and I really, from a kid that grew up listening to heavy metal, I fell into hip hop sort of backwards. And that became my life for a few years. I spent a few years organizing shows and festivals. When I went to college, I was the head of this organization called Hip Hop Congress. And at some point, I was a 19-year-old with about $50,000 or $60,000 towards available to me for programming and whatnot. So we would throw this week-long festival. So I got pretty deep into the event production world, as well as the PR world. All of our events, they were sufficiently well produced that they would basically be in a small college town. They would be front page news. So did that. Turned 21 once eventually. I grew up in Chicago, so once I could actually legally go to things that were not disgraceful 16 or 17 plus venues, I really discovered. I always loved, I loved hip hop, I loved soul music, but when I was 21, I sort of rediscovered electronic music, but this time it was house. And when I say house, especially for some of the younger people listening, I mean what we would call real house.
You're like, I'm from Chicago, so house.
Soulful, funky, deep, an extension of what started as disco, not something that broke off from 140 BPM rave music in the UK. So for the next few years, that became my love and passion. I had the honor to work with and throw events with some people that are bona fide legends in that world. There's a saying in Chicago, maybe in Detroit they say something similar as well, but something along the lines of Chicago, where our locals are your legends, and that was a very real experience for me. That was cool. I got to throw events and play side by side with those guys, and not just play, but also learn about music from those guys, because I'll give you an example of what you can learn from people that grew up in that generation that you're not going to learn from someone that started relatively recently.
Okay.
Someone that I consider a friend and mentor of mine, Ron Trent, invited me to his house. I think I was 24 years old at the time. And he had 2 studios. He had one studio just for music production, and he had one dedicated just for DJing. And the DJ room probably looks kind of like the room that you're in, except instead of having that one shelf, it was like an entire, almost like floor to ceiling wall of records, and a rotary mixer and 2 turntables. I don't remember if he had CDJs or not. And at that time I was throwing a party called So Disco, which was a proper disco party. Disco meaning disco.
Gotcha.
And I remember being in that room, and he played me some records that I would not have considered dance music, but in that environment where you could hear the music so clearly, like it wasn't quite fast enough to like resemble house or kind of the more obvious dancey kind of disco, but when you could feel that music so clearly, where you felt it in your body, all of a sudden you're like, oh, this is dance music too.
Can I ask, can you clarify, was that as a product of just hearing it clearly as in the audio quality, or is it hearing it in the right context?
Probably both, but more the audio quality.
Okay.
Right. I think that if you haven't been to, one of these clubs with sort of a world-class sound system, I don't think you really understand the experience of music from the other end. There are some great kind of consumer level brands, sort of like mobile DJ level brands, but you really need to hear like a Function One sound system and realize, hey, I can hear every sound, and somehow I can still talk to my friends without yelling at the top of my lungs.
Right.
How is that possible? And the answer is, that's basically the science of audio engineering, and sound quality, which I can't go into like the details of what that actually entails, but someone through effort and the right technology and the right equipment made that place sound that way. And it's not an accident. By contrast, if you started DJing around the era of like dubstep, I think the reason dubstep became as big as it did is because if you started listening to music over laptop speakers, you couldn't hear subtleties. You can't hear subtle bass on laptop speakers. So you need that like that roar,
the buzz,
to let you know that it kicked in, that it came in. And I think I truly believe that there's a whole generation of people whose experience of music is shaped by the fact that, they were listening to DJs who got their music off of their laptops. They weren't listening on like high fidelity headphones most of the time. They were just like going through the blogs. And I know what that's like, I've been through both eras where I've done both, where, I've definitely listened to songs on my computer and I was like, I'm not really feeling this. And then I'd be like, I'd be at an event and I'd go up to someone and be like, "What is that?" And they tell me the name of the song, and I was like, "Oh shit! Can we swear?" Yeah, is that fair game?
Yeah, you're fine.
Yeah, I'd be like, "Oh wow! I turned this song down last week." But yeah, so
I think some of that might also have to do with that's a great point, and kind of in the same vein, a lot of people getting their music from that era were hearing like 128 kilobit MP3s too, because that was kind of like the more common format was a lower bitrate MP, or maybe a 192 MP3, and so that plays into the quality thing as well. And I recall a few years back there were some, I don't know, double-blind studies or something where they found that younger people were preferring compressed music over the original uncompressed signals when they were blind testing them, which was just a fascinating phenomenon.
I mean, to kind of bring us to today, I graduated in 2008. If for those that don't remember, the world was basically collapsing at that time. And moving back to Chicago from, I was I will say this, I think I achieved in my 4 years in Bloomington, Indiana, kind of a big fish in a small pond status. But when I moved back to Chicago, where nobody retires effectively. I mean, you're literally like the DJs from the 90s are still competing with the DJs from the 80s, and the DJs from the 2000s are still competing with the DJs from the 80s. You know what I mean? And it's there's only as many people know, there's only so many gigs, so many slots. So that was a long grind. I realized DJing wasn't going to pay my bills anytime soon. I had to look for employment in the quote unquote square world. And I already kind of had an entrepreneurial background in terms of throwing events and whatnot, but I got pretty deep into technology and just the landscape of digital marketing and whatnot. Learned that I was actually pretty good at it, had a few kind of like base hits, if you will. And then in 2010, I started two companies. One of them was the DJ Hookup, and the other one was a marketing technology company called The Hoff. And DJ Hookup was the first company, but what I quickly learned was, while I understood the E of e-commerce, I didn't necessarily understand the commerce so much.
Gotcha.
And I realized in an industry where you had to carry inventory, there wasn't going to be any money for my rent anytime soon. So kind of out of necessity, it was sort of like a rock and a hard place kind of situation where I was kind of like making some websites for people freelance on one side, and then on the other side, I was trying to be a professional DJ, as I'd been doing for the past, almost 10 years. And I was sort of I wasn't able to really commit to either one. So I basically said, you know what, DJing is going to be there. If my passion for it is real, it's going to be there. But if I have to move back to my mom's house, my mom's basement or whatever in the suburbs, an hour away, there's no DJ career to speak of whatsoever. So, hey, maybe get your kind of life together. So I let myself prioritize my career. I started another company. That one did succeed. Ended up selling it to what I call the early 2000s.com company of our industry. We had like the sexy brand, and they had like the market dominance, if you will. About a year later, I came back to the DJ Hookup, and so I left for a while. In case that wasn't clear, I left for a while to work on the other company. But about a year later, 2014, I came back, and a lot of things were broken with the company. Like, our website was awful. It was basically unusable. You couldn't really find anything. And yet I found that we had such high customer reviews, and I really scrutinized over them. And I found that really, like, the one thing that worked in this company that allowed it to even get to where it did in those 4 years, the majority of which I was absent, was just service. People wrote, people could name the exact person that assisted them. They could Yeah, I mean, it was basically like rave reviews specifically about service. And I just realized, okay, if this company survives, if there's anything like really viable here, we need to double down, triple down, quadruple down all aspects of service and experience. And so over the next few years, that's what I did. That's what kind of the change that I led. And obviously, eventually, the website got redeveloped to reflect that and whatnot. But yeah, as of 2016, we became the highest customer rated DJ dealer, which I need to be clear. That doesn't mean we're the largest or we have the most reviews online, but across all the customer rating sites, we have the highest ratings. And then we've kept that status for the past 2 or 3 years. So, I mean, essentially we found the kernel of where our skills and abilities really meet what the DJ market wants, and we just threw everything into that we possibly could and still do. Yeah, I mean that's kind of the story of the DJ Hookup and how it is what it is today.
I want to ask you a question, and just to kind of preface this, this isn't the first conversation that you and I have had. We've had a couple of phone calls preceding this meeting, and you kind of guided me through some help with the going to NAMM, because that was certainly a intimidating first trip for something that size when you don't really know what's going on. And so I've been able to witness, you at work. And you're a hustler, you're busy all the time. Do you still find time to DJ, to do the actual DJ thing? Because I know this is something I struggle with.
No, I don't. And it's not something I struggle with. It's not like, so in about, I think the last gig I had was probably 6 years ago. So that would have been around 2013. And, one thing that I tell a lot of people, a lot of people, and it's not just in music. I talk to other entrepreneurs and whatever. There, especially in our current society where people are like, oh my God, if you're not following your passion, what are you even doing? This kind of mentality. A lot of people, when they find themselves at a crossroads like I did, where, I mean, they were broke and they had to sort of make sense of their lives. They do what I did, which is they go, okay. You know what? I'm going to give myself permission to put this passion of mine, this whatever 8-year, 10-year pursuit of mine on hold, so that I can sort of straighten my life out, and then I'll come back to it as soon as I can, And the one thing that I kind of give myself credit for, and some of my mentors, I probably helped a lot in this regard, is at a certain point, I realized that while I still loved the music, I didn't necessarily have that same craving to go out there and perform anymore. And I remember when I was 19 and I was just completely frothing at the mouth, just ready to go anytime. Like, you need me to play here? Cool. Like, I remember I played some college party. We literally had the turntable set up on the stove. Like, they were on top of burners.
I've played those parties.
Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, that's where I was at a certain point in my life. And at a certain point, and later, I was 26 or whatever it was, 10 years later, I just didn't have that same hunger for it anymore. And honestly, I'm pretty happy with the fact that I let myself move on. I think that's a really important thing to do. Whenever someone says, you know what, I'm going to put this on hold, but trust me, man, I'm coming back to it, blah, blah, blah. I go, hey, for sure. That's where your head is at right now. I get it. And you should do that. But also, if in a few years you don't want to come back, that's totally fine too. And the reason I say that, the reason I like prime people to think that way, is because I've seen people get into multi-year, brutal depression because they can't reconcile their new reality with this previous identity that they set up, or this like promise that they made themselves when they were basically a kid. Like you were 16 at some point. How many things are you currently bound to or obliged to from when you were 16? And yet when it comes to this word passion, it's so like hypnotizing, so blinding, that I've seen so many people just really mess themselves up, where I go, hey, right now you're thinking you're coming back. Cool. Maybe you are. But also, if 2 years go by, you don't want to come back, you're perfectly fine. You're a human. You had an era of your life where you did something. Now you're in a different era. And by the way, you might have a third era later down the line where you're ready to get back into that thing. And it's like, I mean, to me, that's just like so fundamentally human and normal and okay. And, but it definitely conflicts with that whole aesthetic of quote unquote, keeping it real, whatever, following your passion, whatever are these things that like a lot of times people are like shamed for, because they're like, oh, you're just working a job. What do you, it's like, yeah, honestly, there's a lot of immaturity that comes in being a young, creative, artistic person.
Absolutely.
Like a lot of things that people get real sanctimonious about, real preachy about. And then, I mean, hopefully you grow up and later you look back at it and you're like, wow, I was probably pretty unsufferably annoying at that point in time. And a lot of people are.
Yeah, I feel like my snobbery has trended downward over time. At least I like to think so. In that respect.
I mean, if it hasn't, you probably need to seek help. You've made certain decisions that are probably suboptimal to date.
But I'm glad you bring this up, because it might seem kind of weird to talk about something like that on the Passionate DJ podcast. What happens when you lose your passion for it?
Sure.
But we have talked about that on the show before. We've talked about a couple episodes on jaded DJs, and I would rather see somebody walk away from it as an active choice than to stay in it until they hate it. You know what I mean?
Let me say this too. Can I just cut you? Let me say this too. I have been invited quite a few times, and I have friends that were like at previous gigs, and they were like, man, you were dope, blah, blah, blah. Like just do 20 minutes, just do half an hour, whatever. I remember when I was in that like peak passion phase, and I remember some late 20s, early 30s dude who, he quote unquote used to DJ, his boy would put him on. And like, I was like practicing at home for hours, and I was like current and I cared. And this guy was just cashing in on like, oh yeah, my boy's letting me play. And I remember hating that guy so much. I remember like hating that guy so much because he was obviously phoning it in. He didn't care. And that memory stuck with me so clearly that when I mean, honestly, this happened to me as recently as like a month ago. I was literally begged to play a party, and I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that, because I remember what it's like to be on the other side of that. And that kid who's 19, 20, 21, it doesn't matter what age. I mean, he can be 45, it doesn't matter. But the point is, like, that person who's still serious about it, who's really doing it. I mean, that person should get that gig. I don't want to ever be on the other side of that equation where I'm taking that away, essentially like passing on that bad karma. I would rather that have stopped with me.
Yeah, and kind of speaking to your other point about being able to make that choice to walk away, I can definitely relate to that. I have a friend who, I'm the guy poking him, trying to get him back into it, and it's become kind of a joke over the years, but I'm also kind of serious because I think he's really good. I really like the music he plays. I enjoy the time that we spent doing that together, several years ago. And so it's just this push and pull thing that we do. But, one thing that I've told him that is something that I try to say to our audience every now and then is that the cool thing about DJing in 2019 is that it's here for you to explore to any extent that you want. You know what I mean? So like, if you want to pick up a couple pieces of wax every 5 years and put together a mix and then put them away, fine. You know what I mean? If you want to be, every day out here scratching and practicing and promoting, fine. It's scalable. And I think so many people, they either want to join and become a superstar or they quit. And I learned a long time ago not to really focus too much on that listener, because that person will go away eventually. But there will be people who want to keep this in their life, even to a little extent. We get older, we have kids and day jobs and whatnot, and it becomes harder to fit those things in our lives. But
Sure.
We have options these days. We have streaming and digital and access to all the music in the world, and it's not a crisis if you don't have an overnight success.
Yeah, man. I mean, an interesting thing. Well, there's two things. First of all, like the first real kind of generation of DJs started in. When I say DJs, I don't mean originally that was a term referring to someone that played music on the radio. But when I'm referring to DJs, I'm talking about kind of the movement that you would say started with David Mancuso, Larry Levan, those guys, where there was an actual concept of keeping a flow of music with a flow of other people's music going as a live performance at a party of some sort. And I mean, if you think about it, those guys now are in their 50s, in some cases in their 60s. Some of those people are gone already. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. I think I very frequently hear people talk about DJing as if it's a young man's game,
Mm-hmm.
a woman's game. And the funny thing is, I know a lot of people that have like either companies in this industry or like Facebook pages or whatever. If you look at, so Facebook, if you have a page, it'll let you see like the demographics of your followers. If you look at any of those pages, absolutely any of them, 18 to 25 is like a decent demographic, but the vast majority of people are 25, 35, 35, 45, 55, 45, 55. In my business, in the business of selling DJ gear, I probably talk, and I'm not the main one on the phone lines or whatever. Periodically, I hop in and do some sales. But even with as little exposure as I have, I probably speak to someone weekly that has the story of, yeah, man, I started in the 80s. I was all about it, blah, blah, blah. And by the way, people love telling you these stories. They're like, we did this in 86 and we did this in 87, blah, blah, blah. Then I had some kids, had to take care of that, but I'm ready, man. Like I was dope. I'm ready to get back into it. I mean, I talked to this guy that I'm like acting out right now, literally weekly. And there's so many people that are, they're saying some version of, I can't afford to get back into the vinyl game. I remember how expensive that was back then. I'm sure it's just as expensive now. It absolutely is. And, they're trying to go more the digital route, the controller route, or whatever the case may be. And so that's usually their question. But my point, to your point, to my point, these are people that have gone through their relationship with this activity, with this identity, with this hobby, pursuit, whatever, of DJing has evolved over time. And there was a frothing at the mouth passion period. Then there was a can't really sustain this period. And then there was, hey, I still love this. Let's get back into it in some form or another. And that's, like, to your point, that's available to you with anything. I mean, with anything, honestly, with anything you do in your life. And hopefully most people achieve the kind of clarity of mind and the maturity to realize that, so they don't have to be tortured by these, what I call like the promises of their younger selves.
You mentioned earlier that in your early DJing career, in Chicago, it wasn't really paying your bills, and you mentioned in the pre-show chat something about maybe speaking to why some DJs are perpetually broke. We did an episode way back in, it was episode 63. You can get to it at passionatedj.com/63. It was called Competing with Free Jays. We've talked about this a few times. What advice do you have to give to the perpetually broke DJ? Get a real job?
No. Actually, I mean, there are a lot. Look, I get to be in the unique position of interfacing with DJs from like every walk of life, from many countries, every state, every major city. And if you ask me, is it possible to make a healthy living as a DJ? My answer unequivocally is yes. That is on the table. That is there for you. Can it be also, I will let you know that the vast majority of such people that actually make a reasonable living as a DJ, guess what? They're not 18, they're not 20, they're not 22, they're not 24. Usually these are people that have been in it for about 10-ish years, and they're usually in their later 20s, well into their 30s and 40s. And these are people that, I mean, they support families, to be clear. Like, they make a legitimate living. So it can be done. It does exist. The number one thing that maybe I would recommend, when I said why are some DJs perpetually broke, I mean, the first question is, why are some people perpetually broke? And the answer there, I was there too. You know, I lucked out. I did hit some success in my mid-20s, but, you know, a few years later, I also was basically broke. And that's because I had no concept of financial hygiene, no concept of just financial intelligence. So a book that I would definitely recommend, it's not well written, but I recommend it just because it's so actionable, is called I Will Teach You to Be Rich by Ramit Sethi. It's not a masterpiece, but it literally will say, open this account, set this up, you know, like this percent is, you know, at the beginning of the month is going into your savings account and so forth. And so the first thing is just like, you're not special. Your career isn't that different from other people's careers. Right. So like, there are a whole bunch of people in our world, in our society, that know how to manage their money, and there's many others that don't. Get on the side that knows how. So that to me is step one. That's very clear step one. You know, entailed in that, for instance. So one of the key, if you read that book, one of the key things that you will learn is a portion of a percentage of basically every dollar that you learn should go into, so, you know, paying the future version of yourself. That people say, you know, pay yourself first. So whether that you can only afford 5% now, or 10%, or 20, or 30, or 40, or 50%, you know, for every dollar that comes in, a portion of that is going away right away. And if you worked in corporate, you know, they've probably set up some kind of like retirement account type of thing, where a portion of every paycheck, before you can even touch it, it goes straight in there. And for those of us that have never worked in corporate, honestly, I think that's a huge blessing. You like, though that's, your employer has essentially forced you into doing something very wise for yourself. You know, that for those of us that have kind of been independent our whole lives, you know, sometimes it takes a decade, or sometimes we never figure this out. And yeah, for me, it definitely had to come the long way. But, you know, when you're buying your gear, then it can come out of, you can then do it intelligently. It doesn't have to be this like, oh, I'm burning myself this month, and it's through prayer that I feel like I will be able to afford this eventually. If you have set up, for instance, a sub savings account or something like that for gear or gear maintenance or whatever the case is, when you need something or when something breaks, it's essentially like you've already set up that fund where, let's say 2% of your income sort of already goes in there. Or I'm making these numbers up. You have to do like the some of that basic work for yourself. But yeah, if you're already putting away 3, 5, whatever percent, you know, it's going to need to get reinvested into kind of like resources, let's say, whether that be the equipment or promoting yourself or whatever it is that you need to move up to the next level, you're going to be able to make those investments in yourself without it compromising your lifestyle, because you've gotten used to living off of only 90% of every dollar that comes in, or 80%, or 75 or 70%. So your lifestyle is already configured around living off of less than every penny that comes in. I don't want to minimize or I don't want to minimize, there's people that are in severe debt and they're in very bad situations. And I definitely sympathize. And, there are people that are very much living in an unfortunately unavoidable paycheck to paycheck situation. But I think for a lot of people, that paycheck to paycheck is just a product of poor handling of their own finances. Read the book. The book will give you the whole kind of framework of how to think about this. But if you take nothing away, you cannot just have a checking account. You must have a separate account that is money is stored here, and it is not for me to be using on day-to-day stuff. It's not like I got hungry. Yeah, it's not I got hungry, so I'm going to get a bigger dinner tonight money. That's not what it's for, right? So that's probably number two. And then, the part about actually marketing yourself and actually having the right income, I think we could probably do a whole podcast on that alone. There's a lot to say there. There are different DJ business models. I know that you've talked about this in some of your podcasts. You have like the performer DJ versus the like event producer type of DJ and whatnot. But I will say this, if you want to find the shortest path of least resistance to making a living off of DJing, in my experience, from what I've seen, that's mobile DJing. Mm-hmm. Because mobile DJing, the math on mobile DJing is very simple. There are people, there is a rotating, constantly new group of people that need a service provider for their events. They have dedicated budgets. Many of them aren't trying to go the cheapest route because they actually care about the final experience. And basically, essentially, if you think about the mobile DJ market with respect to weddings, bar mitzvahs, bar bat mitzvahs, corporate events, quinceañeras, and whatever else fits into that as like a pool of money that is basically just waiting for DJs to claim it. That is so okay. So to close that point, I think if your number one priority is, hey, I just need to find a way to make money with DJing so I can pay rent with DJing, the most direct, least convoluted way to do that, I think, from what I've seen, is mobile DJing. It's not the same game as the club game. It's not going to be the same host of characters. You might feel like you're sacrificing or something. And the ultimate irony, is a lot of people who find mobile DJing gross is they will take club gigs that they hate, which is like kind of bizarre, like you will still take a club gig where you're like, I hate this crowd. They're so drunk.
True.
I'm constantly just like smacking away these horrible like requests, just like drunk, high people stumbling all over me, trying to protect my gear. But like somehow that's cool. That's keeping it real enough in the club. Whereas like doing someone's wedding, like you'd be making some kind of sacrifice. But there is another side of it. There definitely is in some ways, the club world isn't that different from the mobile DJ world, in the sense that a nightclub that has kind of a relatively stable audience, right? Like usually they'll have promoters and they will have built their name over many years. They've probably invested a lot into their interior and blah, 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 blah. You know, where a nightclub where they're not depending on you to bring the guest, essentially. They essentially need a service provider that will, again, adequately entertain their guests and make them happy enough to come back in a week, in 2 weeks, in a month, or whatever the case may be. And those gigs exist. Obviously, there's many fewer of them. From what I've seen, that is in very large part a networking game. There's a certain way that you're going to get paid in that situation. There's certain investments that you're going to need to make, and you know what your service looks like is going to be a certain thing as well. But yeah, I'm not trying to minimize or say that it's somehow like that's a game. It's not as legitimate. But yeah, in the club game, it's much more about that type of networking. I think it also matters a lot more. You know, at that point, all else equal, if people are actually hyped to come see you at that venue and they'll pay the cover charge and whatever, the venue is much more likely to book you at that point than you know, someone who is just a cool DJ, but like nobody really knows who they are. I mean, at the end of the day, venues get paid by people coming there and paying either for booze or paying for cover. I mean, it's right. Basically it. So if you're not contributing to that, you're not making a good case for why you should be working there. But yeah, I mean, that's where you get a lot of residencies and whatever. And again, there you're going to have to make sacrifices too, because most clubs of that variety that actually have a legit budget to pay their DJs, they're not interested in the vast majority of cases for you to play the most underground, dopest cuts. Like,
right.
House music, you know, Chicago is known as the birthplace of house music, but house was underground in the 80s too. Yes, there was a rave scene and whatnot, like that happened in the 90s and 2000s and whatnot. But I mean, it was underground then too. And while some you know, names and performers and whatnot, they hit it on the international circuit. You know, I personally know someone that got paid $5,000 to play a gig in Croatia and couldn't get $250 to play a gig in Chicago. You know, someone that people respect a lot. You know. And I mean, that's kind of the reality of that world. Like within any given city, within any given market, unless you are a kind of global name, most well-paying club gigs, you're playing what people want to hear, and what people want to hear generally is the hot music of that moment. And I mean, that's part of the business model. That's if you want to be that club resident DJ, that's part of, I think, what you need to accept. And then there is that kind of quote unquote holy grail of like, you're a true creative. You don't make any kind of creative compromises and blah, 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 so on and so forth. But I'll tell you what, a lot of those guys are playing money gigs between their like artistic integrity gigs as well.
You're listening to the Passionate DJ podcast. We're talking to Alex from the DJHookup.com. Just want to give the listener a reminder that Passionate DJ podcast is supported via Patreon. If you want to become a supporter of the Passionate DJ podcast, you can do so by visiting patreon.com/Passionate DJ and sign up and get access to all that great bonus content that you don't get on the main show. Alex, a couple of the things that we talked about in the pre-show chat, I'll kind of let you take the direction whichever way you want for our final segment here. We talked a little bit about networking and existing within a community, and then you also thought that you might want to talk about landing your first gigs or getting more gigs. Which direction would you prefer to take that conversation?
I mean, we can go either way. On the subject of networking, I think that, right, I think the way a lot of people go about networking is sort of this, hey man, will you check out my mixtape, kind of like out of the trunk hustler ethic. Right. And again, I go back to something I've said multiple times in this conversation. It's like, what do you have to offer? One of the ways that I got to meet a lot of people is the fact that I was putting in the legwork to throw and organize a lot of shows, a lot of events. In the case of like Social Disco, for instance, if you remember what 2009 looked like, there was this kind of wave of quote unquote new disco that was cool or whatever. And a lot of people sort of rediscovered old disco because of that. And disco house, you know, became popular again and everything. And so while I basically was a nobody coming back to Chicago at that age, at 22 years old, I created, with some help, I created essentially a platform where a lot of DJs who already loved this music, were passionate about this music, they didn't necessarily have an outlet for it. And so we would invite people to play, and people who, I mean, we for sure couldn't have paid their like normal fees, right? But people that were quote unquote way out of our league would be like, dude, it's dope what you're doing. Let me come through. I'll drop a set on you guys. And so that was a very effective method of I think networking, and you know, but we brought something to the table. And then I remember the first time I met Ron Trent, I literally was in the backyard of this like clothing store that I would go to sometimes. They were having like a cookout, a barbecue, and you know, someone goes, "Hey, I'd like to introduce you to Ron Trent." And you know, he had heard about what I was doing, and he was like, "Yeah, you should," you know, that brings us to the story about the studio earlier. You know, he's like, "Yeah, you should come by sometime." To be clear, I joke about it. Like I drove to those gigs, but if I had to take a cab, I wasn't making enough money to take a cab back. You know, right. There was no money in it for us, but it was a contribution, right? It was like we created a space, and an experience, a vibe, whatever. And obviously we got some amount of people who just wanted to come and have a good time, the attendees at the party. But I think just as importantly, if not more importantly, it was a table on which to essentially break bread with people that otherwise wouldn't have a reason to do so. And again, different people have different things to contribute with you. Like, you've essentially created this platform. And I wanted to say this earlier, when you were saying like, yeah, you know, I don't have as much time to DJ anymore. You know, you created this platform as well, where you're giving a lot of DJs, whether it be kind of in your local community of Dayton or more global acts that are coming through. You know, you created this platform where I'm sure you can reach out to some of these bigger names that you know, you would have been nobody to 5 years ago or whatever, and you know, say, hey, I'm going to be in Florida or whatever. Is there an opportunity for me to play this gig? They've had a good experience with you on your show. They appreciate what you did for them, that you gave them the opportunity and the exposure that your show obviously has, and your audience. And then you know, so you've built something that is of value, that you've made some kind of contribution. And I think the more people can think in those terms, the more people can think of you know, again, what am I bringing to the table? What is my offering here? The better results they'll see, and the happier I think ultimately in the long run they'll be with their DJ career. The more they'll be celebrated and respected by their peers and whatnot. A related question I get to sort of the networking question. I'm doing okay in my city, but I'd like to sort of break into other markets. I'd like to, whatever. Yeah. You know, if I live in Indianapolis, how do I start getting some gigs in Chicago or whatever the case may be? Well, I think the logical thing is you come to that city, you find out kind of who's doing things there. And you say, hey man, can I like pick your brain? Like, what's it like here? Whatever. And really try to understand, really seek to understand before you're understood. And at least put on a good impression. Like you want to contribute something, like you want to come there and do something cool, give them something valuable. And I think, I have a lot of sayings, just things that I've collected over the years, but there's this phrase, if you want money, ask for advice. If you want advice, ask for money. And, you know, so I think in many cases where you're talking with people and you're like, yeah, how do things work here? Who's doing cool stuff? Blah, blah, blah. Who should I talk to? You know, I think in a lot of those cases, people will go, you know what? Did you bring your stuff with you? I think we actually have an opening on Friday night or on Thursday night or whatever the case may be. And you start breaking in, quote unquote, breaking in that way. And obviously if you come prepared and you're ready to put on a good show and your skills are in order and whatnot, you're going to see that snowball grows. Like, it grows over time. But to me, I think it all really comes from that give first, create that table on which to, like I said, to break bread, you know.
This is something that I've seen you at work in, just by the way that you approached me. I hope it's okay that I say so.
Yeah, sure.
Where, you know, one day I was out shopping or something, I don't remember what I was doing, and I get a notification on my phone saying that I had a message through the voicemail system, and it was you, and you gave me the, hey, this is who I am, this is what I do. I feel like there might be some opportunities for us to create some content together. Hit me up if you're interested. And just the way that you kind of broke it out, and I got back to you immediately, and we just kind of had these very pragmatic conversations of, here's what I expect, here's what I expect, here's what I don't like, here's what I do like, and it just, you know, the way that you come at that, I think, really matters, you know, to your point, as opposed to listen to my mix, share my link, or whatever the ask is, you know. It's like, hey, I feel like we might be able to work together, what do you think? And I think that makes a big difference.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. Like, it would be like, I knew that you had a podcast because I tried to start a podcast under the DJ Hookup umbrella a few years ago. We pretty quickly realized how much work it was going to be. At about 2 episodes, that's where we had to put a lid on it. And I saw what you were doing, and you were like 150 episodes deep, or 160, or whatever it was at the time. You know, like, this guy's in a flash in the pan. Like, he's really serious about doing this. And it just makes sense to me that there's probably some, like, collaborative, cooperative opportunities. So when I get on the phone with you, when you're like, yeah, I'd be happy to talk to you, my first question isn't like, dude, we're doing this, blah, 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 blah. You know, they feel like they need to, like, vomit their resume on you. Which I always like to begin with, like, hey, tell me about what you're doing. You know, and you say, hey, we have these initiatives going, like, we're trying to do this, we're trying to move from here to there, blah, blah, blah. You know, and I try to understand, like, what are you trying to achieve, so that if I do pitch you something, I can fit it into the kind of, like, framework of what's valuable to you. And if I do that effectively, I know that later on when I need a favor, I mean, we build a relationship that way. And then later on, it doesn't all have to be transactional, where it's like, hey, you need this, so here's this, and I need this, so here's that. Like, at a certain point, we're homies. And
at a certain point, we're just texting each other, right?
Yeah, exactly. At a certain point, I'm just like, hey, could you do this for me? And you're like, yeah, no problem. You hit me up a few weeks later. How about that? No problem. You know, and so I think this is, I mean, that's to me, that's the anatomy of a relationship. I love the phrase, yo, let's network. And it's like, what do you want?
Like, that's a particular verb they have in mind.
Yeah, like, I mean, you're already starting from a bad place, because you're already making it difficult for me to even understand what you want, you know? So now I'm like, does this guy just want, like, to take advantage of my resources or whatever, my time? Like, what do you want? Like, who are you? Like, what do you bring to the table? You know, give me something, like, give me an idea of, like, where you're coming from with this. And maybe then it's worth my time to get on that call. Like, at least give me that first sense of, like, what this is about, and so I can figure out if this is worth my time or not. But that, yo, let's network, that to me just sounds like, hey man, let me waste your time. And honestly, usually that's what it is. And which is why I generally don't respond to things that sound like that.
We talk a little bit about these things in episode 137, Adventures in Networking. You can get to that at passionatedj.com/137. Alex, before I let you go, what do you listen to outside of this kind of realm of stuff that you're in with DJing? What's your musical taste and background?
I mean, my musical taste is basically the wide umbrella of soulful music, and I mean that encompasses jazz, soul, funk, Afrobeat, house, disco, hip hop, neo soul. I mean, all of those things. Like probably the Aloe Black "I Need a Dollar" station on my Pandora. Yes, I know I don't use Spotify, I use Pandora. That's probably like the station that gets the most action from me. I also, little known fact, I've been a dancer as long or longer than I have been a DJ, and that I do to this day. So like I listen to a lot of Latin music as a result of that. If I'm listening to music, it's probably one of those things.
Alex, this has been a great conversation. I want to thank you so much for coming on today. And do you have any final thoughts that you want to share, and maybe any social media stuff or web links that you want to share with the audience? Sure.
Yeah, I wasn't going to do this, but you hit me up yesterday. We did put together a special promo for Passionate DJ DJs. If you want to hit up the DJHookup.com/passionatedJ. We have set up a special discount code for anybody that needs any gear. Also, for anybody not familiar with us, the real way to use our site to get maximum value out of it is hit us up on live chat or email us at sales@thedjhookup.com. Tell us what you're looking to buy, and we will basically do whatever we can to get you the deepest discount possible, plus help you out with whatever you need. So there's that. Hit up the DJHookup.com. Hit up the DJHookup.com/blog. We're on the subject of contribution. We don't just want to be, hey, buy this, buy this, buy this. We really want to create meaningful resources for DJs. So we've been doing some cool stuff on the blog, and our angle in terms of the content that we're producing is to really create things that are valuable, not necessarily cool. There's a ton of routines out there and whatever. But yeah, earlier this year we put out like a ultimate guide to selling your used DJ equipment and getting the most value out of it for the least amount of work. So, everybody's going to come to that moment in their career when they're going to need to switch up their gear. Definitely encourage you to use that guide and save yourself a lot of time and make some extra money from that. And yeah, I mean, we'll be doing stuff there. Obviously, Instagram, Facebook, you know how that works. But yeah, man, huge thanks for having me here. And
URL again is the DJHookup.com/passionatedJ. Go get the hookup on your DJ gear just for being a listener of Passionate DJ. Alex, thanks so much for setting that up. I know, like you said, that wasn't something that you had in mind, but I kind of hit you up the other day and said, hey, how about something special for our Passionate DJs? I got to look out for my fam. So I appreciate you being willing to do that, and for coming on the show and just dropping all these knowledge bombs, man. You have a lot of important things to share, and I hope that we can do this again sometime soon.
For sure, man. Love to.
All right, thanks so much, Alex, and thanks to you for listening to this episode of the Passionate DJ Podcast. Keep on spinning.